Blood dripped from Marcus's swollen lip as the luxury Rolls Royce pulled away. 24 hours earlier, he and his friends had saved a stranded white man from a Georgia thunderstorm. Now that same man stood silent as armed security dragged the boys from his mansion. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button right now, and subscribe if you're ready to see how these three young heroes went from good Samaritans to being treated like criminals, and the incredible way they turned the tables on a powerful billionaire who underestimated them. Trust me, this story has twists you won't believe. The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked sidewalks of Pinewood Heights, a predominantly black neighborhood in rural Georgia, where systemic neglect was as visible as the potholes that marked every street. This forgotten corner of America was home to three remarkable teenagers: 16-year-old Jamal Washington, the natural-born leader with shoulders already bearing the weight of adult responsibilities; 15-year-old DeAndre Turner, whose hands could breathe life into any mechanical device, despite never having taken a formal class; and 13-year-old Marcus Collins, the youngest but perhaps brightest of the trio, whose optimistic spirit refused to be crushed by their harsh reality. Every morning they walked together to Pinewood Heights High School, a building that looked more like a relic from another century than a place of education, with its leaking roof, outdated textbooks, and overworked teachers struggling to provide quality education with minimal resources. One day, Marcus would often say during these walks, pointing to a torn-out magazine picture of MIT he kept in his worn wallet, "We're going to be in places like this, building stuff that changes the world." It wasn't just idle dreaming. Each boy possessed genuine talent that in any other neighborhood would have been nurtured and celebrated. DeAndre had inherited his grandfather's mechanical genius, learning everything about engines and machinery while helping at Turner's Garage, the family business that was now struggling to stay afloat as his grandfather's health deteriorated. Watching DeAndre's hands dance across an engine was like witnessing art in motion. He could diagnose problems just by listening, feeling, sometimes even smelling the machinery, a gift that seemed almost supernatural to his friends. Jamal's leadership wasn't a choice, but a necessity. With his father gone and his mother working 3 jobs to keep food on the table, he had become the default guardian for his 3 younger siblings, preparing meals, helping with homework, and ensuring bills were paid when his mother's exhaustion overtook her ability to manage it all. Even teachers deferred to his natural authority, often asking him to mediate conflicts among other students or organize community service projects. Marcus, despite being the youngest, possessed a mind that seemed to absorb information like a sponge, particularly anything related to computers and technology. He had taught himself coding using outdated library books and rare moments of internet access at the public library, creating simple programs on a salvaged laptop that DeAndre had repaired for him. Their daily lives were marked by the constant reminders that America viewed them differently because of their skin color. Just last week, they had witnessed white property developers in expensive suits measuring buildings in their neighborhood, discussing plans to clean up the area. Code words they had learned meant displacing black families. When Jamal's mother inquired about their intentions, she was dismissed with patronizing smiles and vague assurances about urban renewal that would benefit everyone. The reality was written in the history of dozens of other black communities that had been systematically dismantled for profit. Walking home from school often meant enduring slurs, shouted from passing vehicles, or being followed by security in the one decent grocery store within walking distance. DeAndre had once been accused of stealing a tool at the hardware store, despite having the receipt in his hand, and Marcus had watched his brilliant science project receive a mediocre grade, while an inferior project by a white student won first place. But resilience ran deep in Pinewood Heights. The community had developed an unspoken code of mutual support, sharing resources, watching each other's children, pooling money for emergencies. The boys had been raised in this tradition, understanding that survival depended on collective strength rather than individual success. Their friendship had been forged through shared hardships and dreams, creating a bond that felt unbreakable. That fateful afternoon, as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, signaling an approaching storm, none of them could have imagined how their lives were about to change. The radio had been warning about severe thunderstorms all day, but they had stayed late at school, Jamal for basketball practice, DeAndre helping the janitor fix the ancient heating system in exchange for being allowed to use tools from the fenchant Werkstatt maintenance shop, and Marcus participating in a math competition where he had once again outperformed everyone despite being younger. As they finally headed home, the first heavy raindrops began to fall quickly, turning into a downpour that reduced visibility to mere feet ahead of them. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating their path momentarily as they debated whether to seek shelter or make a run for it. It was during one of these lightning flashes that they spotted it. An expensive car pulled over on the side of the deserted county road hazard lights, blinking weakly through the curtain of rain. None of them realized that this moment, this simple decision of whether to stop or continue walking, would be the crossroads that would transform not just their lives, but the future of their entire community. Thunder rumbled ominously as Jamal, DeAndre, and Marcus approached the stranded vehicle. A sleek black Bentley Continental with custom rims that seemed absurdly out of place on this rural Georgia backroad. "Should we help?" Marcus asked, his voice barely audible over the pounding rain, while DeAndre's eyes widened in recognition of the luxury automobile worth more than all the homes on their block combined. "I don't know, man," Jamal hesitated, memories of past encounters with wealthy white people flashing through his mind. The time store security followed them through a high-end mall, or when a woman clutched her purse tighter as they passed on the sidewalk. The decision was made for them when a flash of lightning revealed a figure struggling with what appeared to be a flat tire, cursing loudly as rain soaked through expensive clothing. Drawing closer, they could see a middle-aged white man in his early 50s. His casual clothes, doing little to hide what the boys immediately recognized as wealth, from the platinum watch glinting on his wrist to the way he carried himself with the confidence of someone unaccustomed to obstacles. When he noticed their approach, his body language shifted instantly. He straightened hand, moving subtly toward his pocket as he squared his shoulders defensively. "We saw you might need help," Jamal called out, stopping at a respectful distance, hands visible at his sides, in a gesture they'd all learned was necessary when approaching white strangers. "We're not looking for trouble," he added quickly, recognizing the wariness in the man's eyes. The stranger, though they didn't know it yet, this was Richard Blackwood, tech billionaire and CEO of Blackwood Innovations, regarded them with barely disguised suspicion, his eyes darting between their faces and the empty road behind them. "Just passing through," he replied curtly, his voice carrying the polished accent of expensive education. "Got a flat. Roadside assistance should be here soon." DeAndre's eyes had already assessed the situation with professional precision custom wheels, with specialized locking nuts, the kind that required specific tools, and the spare tire compartment that appeared unopened. "Cell service is spotty during storms," he offered carefully. "Could be hours before anyone gets here. I could help. I work on cars with my grandfather." Richard's expression shifted from suspicion to something even more uncomfortable for the boys: condescension. "You fix this?" he asked, making no effort to hide his disbelief as he gestured toward the $80,000 vehicle. "No offense, but this isn't exactly a neighborhood car." The unspoken implication hung in the air clear as the lightning that continued to flash overhead. Before they could respond, the distinctive sound of a police cruiser approaching made all three boys tense instinctively. The sheriff's deputy who emerged from the vehicle didn't even acknowledge them, initially going straight to Richard with concerned inquiries about his well-being. "Everything all right here, sir?" "These boys bothering you?" he asked Hand, resting casually on his holster as he finally turned to the teenagers with narrowed eyes. "We were just offering to help with his flat tire," Marcus explained, his voice taking on the careful, respectful tone black children in the South learned to use around authority from an early age. The deputy snorted dismissively. "Sure you were. Step back from the vehicle, all of you." Richard stood silently as the officer questioned the boys about why they were out in the storm where they lived, demanding identification despite them clearly being minors. It was only when DeAndre respectfully pointed out the specific type of locking wheel nut on the Bentley and explained exactly how to remove it that Richard's expression changed slightly. "You actually know about these?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. DeAndre nodded, rain streaming down his face. "My grandfather has a garage. I've worked on custom wheels before. Not often on a Bentley, but the principle is the same." After a moment's hesitation and another look at the darkening sky, Richard reluctantly agreed to let DeAndre attempt the repair, though the deputy remained watching with open skepticism. As DeAndre worked with the limited tools in the car's emergency kit, his skilled hands moving with confident precision, Richard observed with growing amazement. Jamal held an umbrella salvaged from their backpacks to provide some shelter, while Marcus intelligently engaged Richard in conversation, asking thoughtful questions about the car's engineering that revealed his technical knowledge. Gradually, Richard's responses became less guarded, though the officer continued to hover uncomfortably close. When DeAndre successfully removed the damaged tire and began installing the spare, Richard asked, "Where exactly are we?" "I was following my GPS to a meeting, and it rerouted me because of the storm." The boys exchanged glances, realizing he was headed to the mysterious tech facility that had been built in secretive stages outside of town, a facility that had hired precisely 0 local residents despite promises of job creation. "You're about 5 miles from the Nexus complex," Jamal answered carefully. "But this road won't get you there. You need to backtrack to the highway." Richard looked surprised at their knowledge of his destination, but nodded slowly. As DeAndre finished the job, his hands and clothes now covered in mud and grease, despite his careful work, Richard reached for his wallet. "How much do I owe you boys?" $50 seemed fair. The amount, substantial to the teenagers, whose families struggled for every dollar, hung in the air for a moment before Jamal shook his head. "No need for that, sir. That's just what neighbors do." The response clearly caught Richard off guard, his manicured hand still extended with the bills. "Neighbors," he repeated as if testing an unfamiliar word. "But you don't even know who I am." Marcus smiled, his young face radiating a wisdom beyond his years. "Doesn't matter. Helping people when they need it is just the right thing to do." As Richard reluctantly returned the money to his wallet, the deputy finally stepped away, seemingly disappointed at the peaceful resolution. "Whatever. You boys should get home now," he ordered, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Before driving away, Richard hesitated, an unfamiliar conflict evident on his face as he watched the 3 teenagers continue their walk through the storm. Something about their behavior had challenged his worldview in a way he couldn't immediately reconcile with his preconceptions. As the Bentley disappeared around the curve, none of the boys could have imagined that this brief encounter would set in motion events that would soon force them all to confront the deep-rooted realities of race, power, and justice in America. The storm had intensified by the time Jamal, DeAndre, and Marcus separated to return to their respective homes, the experience with the stranded billionaire already becoming just another story to tell, or so they thought. Jamal arrived to find his mother, Loretta Washington, slumped at their small kitchen table, still in her housekeeping uniform from the Pinecrest Hotel, where she'd worked for 15 years without a single promotion. "Those new managers," she was telling his aunt on the phone, her voice carrying the weight of decades of similar stories, "followed me from room to room today, like I was going to steal the towels or something. Been cleaning those rooms since before they were born, but suddenly I need additional supervision, while the white girls get assigned to the lobby." Jamal set down his backpack quietly, anger simmering as he listened to yet another indignity his mother had to endure. When she noticed him, she quickly changed her tone, hanging up with a forced smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. "How was school, baby?" she asked her ritual question regardless of how exhausted she might be. Jamal shared the story of the stranded man, carefully omitting the deputy's behavior to spare his mother additional worry. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, DeAndre arrived at Turner's garage to find his grandfather Solomon in the midst of another coughing fit that left specks of blood on his handkerchief. The small garage that had once been the pride of Pinewood Heights was now struggling under the weight of unpaid medical bills and predatory lending practices that had forced Solomon to sign over partial ownership to a finance company, charging interest rates that virtually guaranteed eventual foreclosure. They called again today, Solomon told his grandson between labored breaths, pointing to the answering machine, blinking with messages. Talking about restructuring the loan terms. Just means they want the place sooner rather than later. DeAndre's heart sank as he looked around at the garage that had been his sanctuary, the place where his talent had been nurtured when schools had failed him. Marcus returned to a different kind of struggle, his academic achievements creating a painful contrast with the limitations of his environment. On his laptop screen was an acceptance email to a prestigious summer coding program, alongside the crushing realization that his family could never afford the fees, despite it being a potentially life-changing opportunity. His father, David Collins, a former engineer who now drove a delivery truck after his company had systematically pushed out black employees following a merger, reviewed his son's latest programming project with genuine amazement. "You've got a gift, son," he said, the pride in his voice tinged with familiar regret. In another life, another place. He didn't need to finish the thought, they both understood too well. That evening, the community gathered at Pinewood Heights High School's cafeteria for an emergency town meeting regarding the school board's announcement to close their school, consolidating students into a facility nearly 20 miles away. A decision made without any input from affected families. Parents and teachers packed the room as county officials explained, with rehearsed sympathy, that budget constraints made the closure unavoidable. When Jamal's mother questioned why, it was always the predominantly black schools facing cuts, a board member responded with barely concealed condescension. Perhaps if there was more parental involvement and academic achievement in these communities, these decisions would be different. The audible gasps and murmurs from parents, many working multiple jobs while still attending every possible school function, only seemed to reinforce the officials' preconceptions. Those people just don't value education like others do. Another board member whispered to a colleague, not quite quietly enough to avoid being overheard by several outraged community members. As desperate parents proposed alternative funding solutions and teachers offered to take pay cuts, the officials checked watches and shuffled papers, their decision clearly made long before this performative community consultation. Do you believe the school board members actually considered the community's input, or was this meeting just for show? Comment number 1. If you think they already made up their minds before walking in that room, or number 2, if you believe they were genuinely trying to find a solution. Like and subscribe if you've ever witnessed similar treatment of marginalized communities where decisions affecting their lives are made without real consultation. After the devastating meeting, Jamal, DeAndre, and Marcus met at their secret spot, an abandoned water tower providing panoramic views of both their neighborhood and the wealthier communities beyond. It had become their thinking place where dreams were shared and plans hatched away from the constant reminders of limitation. "There's gotta be something we can do." Marcus insisted, his optimism unwavering despite the evening's events. They brainstormed fundraising ideas and community initiatives, all while knowing the systemic forces arrayed against them operated on a scale beyond their reach. Their conversation was interrupted by a breaking news alert on DeAndre's phone. Blackwood Innovations had just announced a major land acquisition in their county for expansion of their research facilities. The accompanying photograph made all three boys freeze. Richard Blackwood, the very man they had helped earlier that day, standing alongside county officials with a ceremonial shovel. "That's him," Jamal whispered unnecessarily. "The guy with the Bentley." They watched in stunned silence as the reporter explained how the expansion would revitalize underutilized areas, another euphemism they recognized for displacing black residents. As midnight approached, and they reluctantly prepared to head home, strange lights in an abandoned section of their neighborhood caught their attention. Curiosity drew them closer, where they discovered surveying equipment and men in expensive suits examining property boundaries despite the late hour. Carefully concealed behind a dilapidated fence, they overheard fragments of conversation about accelerated acquisition and minimizing resistance from current occupants. One man whose authoritative tone marked him as a leader consulted detailed maps of Pinewood Heights with specific properties highlighted. The holdouts in these sections will be the most problematic, he was saying, pointing to areas that included all three boys' homes. But the environmental violations we've documented at the school should give us the leverage we need for immediate condemnation. Most of these people don't have the resources to fight extended legal battles. Another man chuckled coldly, and those who try will find their property taxes reassessed and their insurance premiums mysteriously increased. The usual playbook. DeAndre had to physically restrain Marcus, whose young face had contorted with fury at hearing their lives dismissed so callously. They retreated silently, each boy carrying the heavy knowledge that powers beyond their understanding had already mapped out the erasure of their community. That night, as they lay in their beds across Pinewood Heights, none could sleep. The day's events swirling in their minds like the storm that still occasionally rumbled in the distance. The stranded billionaire, the school closure, the midnight surveyors, disconnected puzzle pieces that somehow felt interconnected in ways they couldn't yet articulate. Little did they know that morning would bring another shocking development that would force those connections into sharp, undeniable focus. How would you react if you discovered powerful people making secret plans to destroy your neighborhood? Would you fight back or try to negotiate? And what do you think will arrive with the morning light that will change these boys' winlight? Understanding of everything that's happening around them. Dawn broke over Pinewood Heights with the aftermath of the storm, puddles reflecting a clear sky that gave no hint of the previous day's fury or the turbulence about to engulf the community. The ordinary morning routine of residents heading to work and school was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a vehicle that seemed transported from another world. A gleaming black Rolls Royce Phantom with darkened windows and customized plates gliding silently down potholed streets like an alien spacecraft. Children stopped their games to stare adults, paused on sagging porches, and within minutes, the neighborhood grapevine had ensured everyone knew about the luxury car prowling their streets. The vehicle moved with deliberate slowness, as if searching for something specific, its very presence raising hackles and suspicions among residents who had learned through generations of experience that unexpected attention from the wealthy rarely benefited communities like theirs. When the Rolls finally stopped in front of DeAndre's grandfather's modest home, adjacent to the struggling garage neighbors, gathered at a cautious distance, some taking phone videos, others whispering warnings based on historical precedents that had seen black families displaced through everything from intimidation to eminent domain abuse. From the driver's seat emerged a uniformed chauffeur who surveyed the gathering crowd with poorly concealed disdain before opening the rear passenger door with practiced deference. The woman who stepped out was tall, white, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most Pinewood residents earned in months. She introduced herself as Victoria Harrington, Executive Assistant to Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Innovations, her crisp pronunciation and posture radiating corporate efficiency. By this time, DeAndre had emerged from the garage, wiping greasy hands on a rag, his grandfather standing protectively behind him despite his frail health. Victoria approached with 3 cream-colored envelopes held before her like offerings. "Mr. Blackwood would like to extend his personal gratitude to you and your friends for your assistance," yesterday she announced, her voice carrying to the watching neighbors. "He requests your presence at Blackwood Estate this afternoon for a special opportunity discussion." The murmurs from onlookers grew louder, a mixture of curiosity and concern. Mrs. Jackson, an elderly resident whose family had lived in Pinewood for 4 generations, pushed forward with the boldness that only comes from having survived decades of broken promises. "Child," she addressed DeAndre, though her eyes remained fixed suspiciously on Victoria. "You know what they say about white folks bearing gifts, especially ones that show up in cars worth more than our whole block." Victoria's smile remained fixed but cooled several degrees. "I assure you, Mr. Blackwood's intentions are entirely honorable. These young men made quite an impression. Word spread quickly to Jamal and Marcus, who arrived breathless just as Victoria was explaining the transportation arrangements. The same Rolls would return at 3 o'clock to collect them. The boys' parents reacted with predictable alarm when summoned. Loretta Washington left her shift early despite knowing it would cost her desperately needed pay. "What exactly does this man want with my son?" she demanded, standing protectively beside Jamal as they all gathered in the Turners' living room, examining the expensive invitations with their gold embossing and heavyweight paper. David Collins. Marcus's father shook his head repeatedly. "Nothing good comes from the sudden interest of rich white men in black children. Nothing in our history suggests otherwise." Solomon Turner, who had been unusually quiet during the discussion, finally spoke up his voice, carrying the weight of lived history that the boys had only read about or heard in stories. In '68, they came like this too, all smiles and opportunities, talking about urban renewal and better housing. Half the neighborhood sold their homes for pennies on the dollar. The other half got forced out when they mysteriously couldn't get loans to fix code violations that hadn't been violations the week before. His roomy eyes fixed on the invitations. The land where their homes stood is that shopping center over in Westfield now. Not one family from here ever got to open a business there. Victoria had departed, leaving the choice in their hands, an illusion of agency that felt thin against the backdrop of Solomon's reminiscence. The three families debated intensely, with the parents firmly against accepting the invitation and the boys torn between caution and burning curiosity about what the billionaire could possibly want. "Let's at least research this guy before deciding," Marcus suggested, his logical mind seeking data before conclusions. Using the library's computer that afternoon, they discovered troubling patterns in Richard Blackwood's business practices. Articles detailed how Blackwood Innovations had become a tech giant through aggressive acquisitions and ruthless elimination of competition. More disturbingly, several investigative pieces outlined how Blackwood's development projects had consistently displaced low-income, predominantly minority communities in multiple states, always cloaked in the language of progress and revitalization. "This is exactly what they're planning here," Jamal realized, connecting their midnight discovery to the pattern evident in Blackwood's history. But why invite us? What do three teenagers have to do with his plans for Pinewood? Despite, or perhaps because of, their discoveries, the boys made the controversial decision to accept the invitation. "If we don't go, we'll never know what he's planning," DeAndre reasoned, "and we might miss our only chance to do something about it." Their parents reluctantly agreed after hours of debate, extracting solemn promises about safety protocols, staying together at all times, checking in by phone hourly, and leaving immediately at the first sign of trouble. The preparation for the visit took on the gravity of a military mission. Clothes were borrowed and pressed conversations rehearsed and boundaries firmly established. Marcus's mother, a former paralegal, coached them on their legal rights and which documents they should refuse to sign. Jamal's uncle loaned him a watch with a built-in recording device, a remnant from his days as a private investigator. The neighborhood rallied around them with advice ranging from practical to paranoid, the collective wisdom of a community that had learned the hard way that survival often depended on anticipating the worst intentions behind smiling faces. As 3 o'clock approached, tension mounted across Pinewood Heights. The boys gathered at DeAndre's home dressed in their best clothes, a mismatched assemblage of special occasion attire that highlighted the gap between their world and the one they were about to enter. When the Rolls Royce returned precisely on schedule, it felt less like a luxury and more like a vessel crossing between realms. The driver who held the door open for them was different from the morning, younger with a military bearing and eyes that scanned them with professional assessment rather than disdain. "Mr. Blackwood is looking forward to meeting you properly," he said as they settled into leather seats softer than any they had ever experienced. As the vehicle pulled away, the boys caught final glimpses of their parents standing together on the sidewalk, faces etched with the complex mixture of pride, hope, and fear that has characterized black parenthood in America for generations, wanting to protect their children while knowing they must eventually send them into a world that too often views them as less than. The Rolls Royce glided away from Pinewood Heights, carrying three teenagers toward an encounter that would test not just their courage and integrity, but their very understanding of how power and race shaped the world they inhabited. None of them could have predicted just how dangerous that world was about to become, or how their simple act of roadside kindness had set them on a collision course with forces that had destroyed communities like theirs for decades, with communities like theirs for decades. Complete impunity. The Blackwood estate materialized before them like something from another dimension. 20 acres of manicured perfection, surrounded by walls topped with discreet but unmistakable security measures. As the Rolls-Royce approached massive iron gates, the driver didn't need to stop. Cameras swiveled to capture every angle of the vehicle, while the gates parted automatically, revealing a winding driveway bordered by perfectly symmetrical trees imported from some exotic locale. Jamal nudged Marcus, pointing silently to the armed security personnel positioned strategically throughout the grounds, their earpieces and subtle bulges beneath dark jackets signaling their purpose. DeAndre noted the cutting-edge surveillance technology disguised as landscape features, motion sensors, masquerading as decorative stones cameras concealed within architectural elements, even what appeared to be facial recognition. Systems integrated into the outdoor lighting. The mansion itself was a modernist statement of glass, steel, and concrete, spanning at least 15,000 square feet, its sharp angles and expansive windows declaring its owner's preference for contemporary dominance rather than historical grandeur. As they approached the entrance, the driver spoke into his wrist microphone, "Package delivered," a phrase that sent an uncomfortable chill through the boys. The massive front doors opened to reveal a grand foyer where they were met not by their host but by a security team that made no attempt to disguise their purpose. Arms out, legs apart, ordered the lead officer, a former military type whose eyes held the cold assessment of someone trained to view others as potential threats rather than people. The boys exchanged alarmed glances. They had expected a business meeting, not a security checkpoint. "Is this really necessary?" Marcus asked, his 13-year-old voice cracking slightly with indignation. The security lead's expression didn't change. "Standard procedure for all visitors to Blackwood Estate: cooperate or leave." The choice was delivered with such finality that the boys complied, enduring a humiliating pat-down and having their phones confiscated for security purposes despite Jamal's protests about their promise to check in with their parents. Even the watch given by his uncle was removed, the recording function, apparently detected by scanners they hadn't noticed. Only after this degrading welcome were they escorted deeper into the mansion through spaces designed to overwhelm with their opulence. Ceilings that soared 20 feet high, artwork worth millions displayed casually on walls, technology so advanced it seemed to anticipate needs before they were expressed. In a vast living area with panoramic views of the surrounding landscape, they finally encountered Richard Blackwood, though not as they expected. He was holding court among a group of similarly wealthy-looking white men and women, all clutching champagne flutes and laughing at something that had been said before the boys' arrival. When Richard noticed them, his demeanor shifted subtly, the easy camaraderie with his peers replaced by a more calculated presence as he approached. "Ah, here they are," he announced, gesturing expansively. "The resourceful young men I was telling you about." Not once did he use their names despite Victoria having obtained them for the invitations. Instead, he presented them almost like exhibits. "This one figured out my custom locking wheel system," he said, nodding toward DeAndre without directly addressing him. The assembled guests regarded the teenagers with expressions ranging from mild curiosity to barely concealed discomfort at having their social space invaded. One woman in her 60s with diamond jewelry that caught the light with every slight movement leaned toward her companion and whispered just loudly enough to be overheard. Richard always did have a flair for the dramatic. "I suppose this is for his diversity initiative." The companion nodded knowingly. "Tax advantages. Plus, it looks good in the annual report." Jamal felt his jaw tighten, but maintained the composed expression his mother had practiced with him. The careful neutrality that Black Americans learn is safest in predominantly white spaces where any sign of anger, no matter how justified, can be weaponized. Richard led them on a tour that seemed designed specifically to showcase the extreme wealth gap between their worlds. Each room contained technology that could have revitalized entire sections of Pinewood Heights, from a home automation system that reportedly cost more than all three of their houses combined to a kitchen where the refrigerator alone had cost $20,000. Throughout the tour, they were introduced to various executives and associates, none of whom seemed particularly interested in the teenagers beyond their value, as evidence of Richard's supposed benevolence. During a demonstration of Richard's private technology museum, Marcus's extensive knowledge became accidentally apparent when he correctly identified a programming flaw in a prototype display. That recursive function will crash if the input exceeds certain parameters, he noted almost to himself, momentarily forgetting the role he was tacitly expected to play. Richard stopped mid-sentence, genuine surprise crossing his features. "You understand recursive programming." At your age, the condescension in his tone was unmistakable. But Marcus, caught up in the intellectual puzzle, didn't notice. "Yes, sir. I taught myself from library books. The algorithm needs a termination condition here, or it'll create an infinite loop when processing edge cases." An uncomfortable silence followed as Richard and several nearby executives recalibrated their assumptions. Soon after, during a tour of the automotive collection housed in a climate-controlled underground garage, DeAndre's expertise similarly disrupted the carefully maintained narrative. When Richard proudly displayed a prototype electric vehicle his company was developing, DeAndre immediately identified critical design flaws in the battery cooling system. "That configuration will overheat under sustained load," he explained, pointing to specific components. "The heat-sink design is insufficient for the power density you're trying to achieve." An engineer present for the tour initially scoffed, but fell silent when Richard demanded an explanation, and DeAndre proceeded to outline an alternative approach with professional precision. The pattern repeated throughout the afternoon, moments where the boys' natural abilities challenged the stereotypes their hosts clearly held, creating brief cognitive dissonance before the wealthy visitors re-established their comfortable worldview, with comments like, "They must have had an exceptional teacher somewhere," or perhaps it's an intuitive understanding rather than real knowledge. While the others were distracted by a virtual reality demonstration, Jamal noticed a partially open door leading to what appeared to be a planning room. Slipping away momentarily, he discovered wall-sized maps of the county, with certain areas highlighted in red, including all of Pinewood Heights. Before he could investigate further, Victoria appeared silently beside him. Curious about geography, she asked, her tone impossible to read as she firmly closed the door. "Mr. Blackwood prefers guests to remain with the tour." Throughout an elaborate dinner served in a dining room that could have comfortably seated 50, the boys endured a steady stream of microaggressions and outright racist comments, thinly veiled as observations or jokes. "You boys must feel like you've landed on another planet," chuckled a tech investor seated near Marcus. "I remember my first time seeing how the other half lives." Another guest, a real estate developer with political aspirations, launched into a monologue about cultural barriers to success and how some communities just don't emphasize education and hard work the way others do, while looking pointedly at the three teenagers. Richard notably never intervened or contradicted these statements, maintaining an amused smile that tacitly endorsed the perspectives being shared. As servers cleared the dessert plates, which DeAndre noticed were handled by the only other black people they had seen in the mansion, Richard finally addressed the purpose of their invitation. "Gentlemen, I believe in recognizing potential wherever I find it." He began his voice, taking on the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to making magnanimous pronouncements. "Your actions yesterday demonstrated qualities I value: initiative, problem-solving, technical aptitude. I'd like to discuss an opportunity that could significantly impact your futures." He paused dramatically before continuing. "But such matters are best discussed privately. If you'll join me in my office." As they followed Richard through more cavernous spaces decorated with clear disregard for expense, the boys exchanged glances loaded with unspoken communication. They had endured hours of subtle and not-so-subtle degradation, watching their community being dismissed and disparaged by people who viewed them as curiosities rather than equals. Whatever opportunity awaited them would come with strings attached. The only question was how visible those strings would be, and what they would ultimately be expected to sacrifice in exchange for Richard Blackwood's patronage. Richard's office occupied the mansion's entire east wing, a sprawling space dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking immaculately landscaped grounds that seemed to stretch endlessly into the Georgia twilight. Unlike the ostentatious display of wealth in other areas, this room projected power through understated elegance. Custom furniture crafted from rare, sustainable woods technology, so seamlessly integrated it was nearly invisible, and strategic lighting that ensured Richard Blackwood remained the focal point regardless of where one stood. As the heavy soundproof door closed behind them with an expensive whisper, the atmosphere shifted palpably from the social performance of dinner to something more intentional. "Please sit," Richard gestured to a conversation area featuring leather chairs that probably cost more than a year's rent in Pinewood Heights. Victoria appeared silently with a tray of non-alcoholic drinks, served them with professional efficiency, then positioned herself discreetly in the background, tablet in hand, presumably to document whatever was about to transpire. "I'll be direct," Richard began once they were settled, leaning forward with practiced sincerity. "You three young men have impressed me, which doesn't happen often. Your technical aptitudes are extraordinary given your circumstances." He paused, letting the backhanded compliment hang momentarily. "I'm prepared to make an investment in your futures. Full academic scholarships to the preparatory academy of your choice, followed by guaranteed admission to elite universities, and eventually positions within Blackwood Innovations." The boys sat in stunned silence as Richard outlined an offer that represented everything they had ever dreamed about: educational opportunities beyond anything available in their community, mentorship from industry leaders, and financial support that would lift not just them but potentially their families from economic precarity. It was on its surface life-changing in every positive sense. "Why, Jamal?" finally asked, his voice careful but direct. "Why us specifically? You meet thousands of people. What makes three random teenagers from Pinewood Heights worth this kind of investment? A flicker of something. Perhaps respect, perhaps annoyance at being questioned," crossed Richard's face before his practiced smile returned. "I believe in identifying exceptional talent early. You'd be surprised how often it appears in unexpected places." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "But there is, of course, a synergistic component to my offer." The corporate jargon immediately raised internal alarms for all three boys, meaning DeAndre prompted. Richard's expression shifted to one of calculated candor. "Blackwood Innovations is expanding its research and development footprint. We've acquired land in your county for a state-of-the-art facility that will create hundreds of jobs and revitalize economically depressed areas." He gestured toward a holographic display that materialized in the center of the room, showing architectural renderings of futuristic buildings integrated with green spaces. Progress, unfortunately, sometimes meets resistance from communities, resistant to change, often due to misinformation or lack of education about the benefits development brings. The implication was clear even before he continued. "Your community trusts you. As scholarship recipients and Blackwood Innovations ambassadors, you could help facilitate a smoother transition, explaining the opportunities, addressing concerns, perhaps even assisting with property acquisitions by introducing our property acquisitions representatives to key community members." Marcus's young face darkened with understanding. "You want us to convince our neighbors to sell their homes?" Richard winced slightly at the blunt framing. "I prefer to think of it as helping your community embrace inevitable progress. Change is coming to that area regardless. Your involvement would simply ensure your friends and families benefit maximally from it." He leaned forward again, voice dropping confidentially. "Many of those properties are structurally compromised, some violating multiple building codes. Owners could face significant legal liabilities. Our offers are substantially above market value. A lifeline, really." Jamal felt cold anger building but kept his expression neutral, And if people don't want to sell, Richard shrugged with practiced casualness. As I said, change is inevitable. Those choosing to remain would eventually find themselves surrounded by construction, facing increased property taxes as area values rise. Most come around to the economic reality eventually. Those who don't. He let the sentence hang, unfinished, its implication sufficiently clear. "We need your answer relatively soon," he continued. "The enrollment deadline for Westridge Preparatory Academy is approaching. It's where my own children attended, exclusive, excellent STEM programs." Victoria stepped forward smoothly. "Perhaps the young men would appreciate a few minutes to discuss. Privately, sir. I can show them to the balcony where they'll have privacy." Richard nodded magnanimously. "Of course. This is a significant decision. Take 15 minutes. Victoria will remain nearby if you have questions." Once alone on the expansive balcony overlooking manicured gardens illuminated by subtle landscape, lighting, the boys huddled together, speaking in hushed tones despite being supposedly out of earshot. "He's trying to buy us," DeAndre hissed. "Use us against our own community." Marcus nodded, his young face troubled. "Classic colonizer tactic. Elevate a few individuals from the oppressed group, use them to control the rest. It's in every history book they don't assign at school." Jamal paced the balcony's perimeter, mind racing. "We need to know exactly what they're planning. That map I saw had Pinewood completely highlighted, not just parts of it. A silent consensus formed between them. They needed more information before responding to Richard's offer. Returning to the office, they found it temporarily empty, with Victoria explaining that Richard had been called to handle an urgent business matter. "He suggested I answer any immediate questions while he's occupied," she offered, her professional demeanor unchanged. "May I bring you anything while you wait?" Actually, Jamal improvised. Marcus was interested in the historical photographs we noticed earlier. The ones showing Blackwood's previous developments. Victoria hesitated momentarily before nodding. "Of course. They're displayed in the eastern corridor. I'll show you." As she led Marcus and Jamal away, DeAndre casually mentioned needing to use the restroom, having noted its location during their earlier tour. Once alone, he moved quickly, not toward the bathroom, but back to Richard's desk, where multiple tablets and screens displayed various documents. Years of working with his grandfather had taught him to gather information quickly and efficiently. Fingers flying across screens, he found files labeled Pinewood Acquisition Strategy and began scanning content, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Meanwhile, Victoria was showing Marcus and Jamal photographs of previous Blackwood developments, narrating with rehearsed precision, "Prine. This was the Riverside Renewal Project. Previously a declining industrial area, now home to Blackwood's West Coast headquarters and luxury apartments." What she didn't mention, but was obvious from comparing before and after images, was that a diverse community had been completely erased, replaced by structures serving an entirely different demographic. Marcus asked strategic questions to keep Victoria engaged, while Jamal slipped away under the pretense of admiring a particularly interesting architectural model. He moved quickly through adjacent rooms, until finding the planning area he'd glimpsed earlier. Inside, detailed maps and documents confirmed their worst fears. Not just plans for acquiring Pinewood Heights, but evidence of deliberate strategies to depress property values, manipulate zoning regulations, and exploit building code enforcement to pressure homeowners into selling. Most disturbingly, he found geological surveys indicating significant mineral deposits beneath Pinewood, rare earth elements essential for next-generation technology manufacturing. The true value of their land was exponentially higher than the generous offers Blackwood planned to make. When a security alert suddenly blared through the mansion's speaker system, Jamal knew their unauthorized exploration had been discovered. He quickly photographed key documents with his backup phone, an old device the security team had overlooked during their earlier search, before racing back toward Richard's office. He arrived to find DeAndre already caught standing rigidly, as Richard scrolled through security footage showing him accessing confidential files. Disappointing, Richard was saying, his earlier facade of benevolence completely evaporated. "I offer you extraordinary opportunities, and your response is corporate espionage." DeAndre stood his ground. "You're planning to destroy our entire community, for minerals under our homes, while pretending to offer us a fraction of what the land is worth. You wanted to use us to trick our own families into surrendering everything they've built. Richard's expression hardened. What I'm offering you three is a chance to escape a community that has no future. The economic forces at play are beyond your comprehension. Development, progress, renewal. These are inevitable. People like you can either adapt or be left behind. People like us, Marcus questioned, as he and Jamal were escorted in by security personnel. You mean black people whose communities have been systematically destroyed for profit throughout American history? Richard's laugh was genuine but cold. This isn't about race, it's about economic reality. If people can't afford to maintain their properties, don't have the education to demand better schools, lack the political connections to influence zoning decisions, then yes, eventually market forces will replace them with those who do. That's not racism, it's capitalism. He studied them thoughtfully. You know what's truly disappointing? You three actually have the intelligence to understand your position in the system. I was offering you a ladder out, a rare opportunity to join the winners rather than remain with the losers. Jamal stepped forward despite the security guard tensing beside him. Those losers are our families, our neighbors, people who've supported each other through every systemic obstacle America has thrown at them. We'd rather stand with them than betray them for your blood money. Richard's expression shifted to something almost pitying, noble but naive. Let me explain your situation clearly. You are three black teenagers who gained access to my home under false pretenses, accessed confidential corporate documents without authorization, and attempted to photograph proprietary information. That's multiple felonies. He gestured toward the security team. My head of security was with Delta Force. Several others are former FBI. Their testimony against three boys from a high-crime neighborhood would be unquestioned. The threat hung in the air, its implications crystal clear. Know your place, Richard concluded quietly. That's the lesson here. Know where you stand in the hierarchy and make your choices accordingly. He nodded to Victoria. Call their parents. Explain there's been a misunderstanding, and the boys need to be collected immediately. As Victoria reached for her phone, Marcus spoke up, his voice steady despite his youth. Our place is with our community, standing against people like you, who think your wealth gives you the right to destroy other people's lives. Richard's smile never reached his eyes. Admirable sentiments. Let's see how well they serve you moving forward. When they attempted to leave, security personnel blocked their path. Your phones, the head of security demanded. All of them. Though Jamal had concealed his backup device, the comprehensive scanning equipment quickly detected it. As it was confiscated with its photographic evidence of Blackwood's plans, the last hope of warning their community seemed to vanish. Separate them until their parents arrive, Richard instructed as he turned away dismissively. I have actual business to attend to. Security guards gripped each boy firmly by the arm, escorting them in different directions through the massive mansion. Their simple act of roadside kindness had led them directly into the machinery of power that had been destroying communities like theirs for generations, and now they were caught in its gears, with no clear path of escape. Have you ever been in a situation where someone with power tried to manipulate you into betraying your own values or community? Comment number 1, if you would have taken Richard's offer for a better life, or number 2, if you would have stood with your community like these boys did. Like and subscribe if you've ever witnessed powerful people using their privilege to exploit or displace vulnerable communities. The real question now is separated from each other, in this massive mansion surrounded by armed security, and with all evidence confiscated, what could three teenagers possibly do against a billionaire determined to destroy everything they comprehend? Love. How will they escape this golden trap and warn their families before it's too late? Darkness had descended fully over Blackwood Estate by the time the boys were forcibly separated, each escorted to different guest suites that functioned as elegant prisons. Marcus, the youngest, found himself in a room larger than his entire home, its luxury both intimidating and offensive given the context of their situation. 2 security personnel stationed outside his door made escape through conventional means impossible. Pacing the perimeter, he methodically examined every potential resource. The smart home panel controlling lighting and climate, the massive television with its integrated computer system, even the decorative items that might serve as tools. Years of making do with limited resources in Pinewood Heights had cultivated an ingenuity that now focused entirely on finding a technological vulnerability in this gilded cage. Meanwhile, DeAndre had been placed in a suite overlooking the estate's eastern grounds, offering a clear view of the security measures preventing unauthorized exit. Motion sensors embedded in landscaping cameras with thermal capabilities and patrols, moving in coordinated patterns that left no blind spots. His mechanical mind immediately began analyzing these systems, identifying potential weaknesses and timing patterns. The advanced vehicles parked in the motor court below caught his attention, particularly their electronic security systems, which he had studied extensively through technical manuals at his grandfather's garage. The third-floor suite assigned to Jamal featured similar luxury, but included an unexpected visitor, Richard himself, who entered without knocking security, remaining discreetly outside. "I thought we might benefit from a more personal conversation," he began, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter while pointedly not offering one to Jamal. "You're the leader among your friends. That much is obvious. Leaders understand pragmatism, making difficult choices for greater benefit." Jamal remained silent, watching Richard, with the careful neutrality his mother had taught him to maintain around powerful white men. "I came from nothing, you know," Richard continued, gesturing with his glass toward a framed photograph of a dilapidated trailer. "Poorest white family in a poor Appalachian town. No running water until I was 12. Father worked himself to death in the mines." He studied Jamal's reaction before continuing. "Your expression suggests skepticism. Good, healthy skepticism is valuable. But it's true. I understand deprivation, limited opportunities, systematic barriers. The difference between us is that I learned to play the game rather than resenting its existence." He set his glass down precisely on a coaster. "The system isn't changing, Jamal. Not in your lifetime. Not in your children's lifetime. Those with power maintain power. That's the one constant throughout human history. The only meaningful choice is whether you position yourself to benefit from that reality or allow yourself to become its victim." Jamal finally spoke, his voice controlled despite his internal fury. "And those who can't play the game because of their skin color," Richard shrugged. "Obstacles vary. Solutions remain similar. Identify, leverage, exploit opportunities, accept necessary compromises." His expression hardened slightly. "Like the compromise I'm offering you now. One scholarship remains available, for you alone. Your friends have demonstrated they're unwilling to be reasonable partners in progress. But you," he pointed directly at Jamal, "you have the pragmatism to understand the reality of your situation." Jamal maintained eye contact, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably before responding. "And what happens to DeAndre and Marcus in this scenario? To our families and neighbors. Not your responsibility," Richard replied immediately. "That's the first lesson of advancement. Cutting emotional ties that anchor you to losing positions. Every successful person throughout history has stepped over others to reach higher ground. It's not personal, it's evolutionary." Across the mansion, Marcus was receiving a different approach from Victoria, who had entered his room bearing a tray of cookies and milk in a transparent attempt to emphasize his youth. "Mr. Blackwood wanted me to clarify some misunderstandings." She began, her tone professionally sympathetic. "The development plans you saw are preliminary, with multiple community preservation options still under consideration." When Marcus remained skeptical, she changed tactics. "I understand your position better than you might think. My own family was displaced by development when I was not much older than you." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Between us, I've been documenting some of Richard's more questionable practices for years." From her tablet, she discreetly showed Marcus evidence of environmental violations, discriminatory hiring practices, and apparent bribery of officials. "I'm building a case, but it takes time and requires someone inside the organization." Her implication was clear. Marcus could potentially be that inside person if he accepted Richard's offer and separated himself from his friend's resistance. In the third suite, DeAndre faced the most overtly threatening approach from the head of security, a man who introduced himself only as commander, his military background evident in every controlled movement. "Your friends are making the smart choice as we speak," he informed DeAndre while casually examining the room for potential weapons or tools. The tall one already asked about compensation details. The little one's talking with Victoria about programming opportunities. When DeAndre showed no reaction, the commander changed tactics. "Look, I get loyalty, served with men I'd die for. But loyalty has contexts. Those neighborhoods, they're dying anyway. Blackwood's development will at least create jobs even if they're not for people currently living there." He leaned closer. "Your grandfather's garage, foundation's failing roof, needs complete replacement. Commercial property like that violations could shut him down permanently. Unless someone with influence intervenes." The implied threat and potential salvation were equally clear. As each boy was separately pressured, they faced not just external manipulation but their own internal doubts. The offers were tempting precisely because they contained partial truths. Their neighborhood was struggling, opportunities were scarce, and the system was indeed stacked against them. Hours passed as they each wrestled with these realities, wondering if the others might be yielding to pressure or temptation. What none of their captors realized was how deeply the boys had absorbed the community values of Pinewood Heights. Years of watching parents and neighbors support each other through impossible situations had ingrained a fundamental understanding that collective survival depended on mutual loyalty, not individual advancement at others' expense. It was Marcus who first discovered a way to communicate his technological curiosity, having identified that the smart home systems controlling each suite were networked together. Using a technique he had developed for bypassing school firewalls, he managed to create a rudimentary text channel through the television's diagnostic system, appearing as routine maintenance data to anyone monitoring network. Traffic. J.D. found comms. Guards outside. Victoria showed evidence against RB. Offered separate deal. Did you? His message reached the other suites, where Jamal and DeAndre, each already searching for similar vulnerabilities, quickly responded with confirmation. They were also being approached separately. Over the makeshift communication channel, they shared details of the different tactics used against them, recognizing the classic strategy of division. "Commander claimed you both accepted deals," DeAndre typed. "Standard manipulation," Jamal responded. "Richard offered only me a scholarship. Tried to appeal to pragmatism." Marcus added, "Victoria suggested she's building case against RB. Could be true or manipulation. Showed concerning documents either way." Through this hidden dialogue, they reinforced their commitment to stand together, developing a plan that leveraged their complementary skills. Meanwhile, throughout the mansion, security personnel made little effort to conceal their assumptions about the boys. Typical, one guard commented to another within Marcus's hearing. "Offer them everything, and they still act ungrateful. Some people just don't understand opportunity." Another responded, "Can't help those who won't help themselves. This neighborhood's getting redeveloped whether they like it or not. Smart move would be taking the education and getting out." A third added, "Boss is being more than generous considering they were snooping through confidential files. If it were up to me, they'd be in police custody already." These casual conversations, not meant for the boys to overhear, but conducted with the assumption that their opinions didn't matter, provided valuable intelligence about security patterns and attitudes. Around midnight, Victoria unexpectedly entered Jamal's suite, carefully closing the door before speaking in hushed tones. "Your parents have been calling repeatedly. Richard's people are telling them you've decided to stay overnight to discuss scholarship details." She glanced nervously toward the door. "They're not being allowed to speak with you directly, which is crossing several legal lines." She hesitated before continuing. "What I told your friend Marcus was true. I've been documenting Richard's practices originally as insurance for myself, but it's become something more." From her jacket, she removed a small data drive. "This contains evidence of multiple violations. Environmental labor discrimination. Richard's planning something significant in Pinewood Heights that goes beyond just another development. There are minerals under your community, essential for quantum computing. The land is worth billions, not the millions he's planning to pay. Jamal studied her carefully, looking for signs of deception. Why help us now? Victoria's professional veneer cracked slightly. Because I've seen this playbook executed in 12 other communities across 4 states. The outcome is always the same. Families displaced, communities destroyed, promises broken. Richard believes everyone has a price or a breaking point. I need to prove him wrong, even once. She pressed the drive into his hand. I can create a distraction at exactly 2 a.m. The security shift change creates a 7-minute vulnerability on the east side service entrance. As she left, Jamal immediately shared this development with the others through their hidden communication channel. They spent the next hour refining their escape plan, with DeAndre mapping potential routes based on his observations of security patterns and Marcus identifying technological vulnerabilities they could exploit. When 2 a.m. approached, all three prepared for their coordinated attempt, knowing the risks, but equally aware that remaining separated in Blackwood's control would only lead to their community's destruction. Their emerging plan represented their shared values and complementary strengths. The leadership and strategic thinking Jamal had developed caring for his siblings. The mechanical ingenuity DeAndre had honed in his grandfather's garage. And the technological brilliance Marcus had cultivated despite limited resources. Whether Victoria's offer of help was genuine or another manipulation remained to be seen, but either way, they were determined to face whatever came next together rather than accept individual rewards at the cost of their shared principles and community's survival. Exactly at 2 a.m., a series of alarms blared from the mansion's western wing, drawing security personnel away from their posts as Victoria had promised. The distraction appeared to be a small fire in an unoccupied guest suite, significant enough to demand immediate attention, but contained enough to avoid serious damage. Through their improvised communication system, the boys coordinated their movements with military precision. Execute in 30 seconds. D first, then MJ last. Rendezvous point B, if separated. DeAndre moved first, having spent hours studying the mechanical components of his suite's door lock. Using a makeshift tool fashioned from a metal coat hanger and the internal components of an electric toothbrush he had disassembled, he triggered the emergency release mechanism designed to prevent occupants from being trapped during power failures. The door opened silently, revealing a temporarily empty hallway as guards responded to the distant alarm. Moving with the quiet confidence, developed through years of navigating his grandfather's garage in darkness to avoid waking him, DeAndre proceeded to Marcus's door and repeated the process. The younger boy emerged, clutching a repurposed tablet he had modified by accessing its debugging interface and installing a rudimentary program capable of interacting with the mansion's smart home system. Together, they reached Jamal's suite, completing the first phase of their escape plan with unexpected ease. Victoria came through. Jamal whispered, showing them the data drive. "But we need to move fast. This could still be an elaborate test." Following DeAndre's memorized map of the mansion's layout, they navigated service corridors normally used only by staff, avoiding the main hallways covered by security cameras. Marcus's modified tablet proved invaluable, allowing him to temporarily loop camera feeds and trigger minor system distractions throughout the building. Lights flickering in distant rooms, temperature alarms activating in unoccupied areas, entertainment systems spontaneously turning on at maximum volume. These distributed disruptions further stretched the security team's attention, creating crucial gaps in their coverage. Descending to the ground floor through a service elevator normally used for transporting laundry and supplies, they encountered their first human obstacle, a startled housekeeper who froze upon seeing 3 black teenagers where none should be. Before she could react, Jamal spoke quickly, in the fluent Spanish he had learned from his neighbors. "Por favor, señora, estamos tratando de escapar de una situación peligrosa. No queremos causar problemas." The woman's expression shifted from alarm to understanding. As Jamal explained, they were attempting to escape a dangerous situation. After a moment's hesitation, she pointed toward a service door, whispering "Vayan con Dios." This unexpected alliance, between those occupying different positions in Blackwood's hierarchy of labor, but united in their marginalization, provided them a path forward that wouldn't have appeared on any security protocol. Through the indicated door, they found themselves in a massive commercial kitchen where the day's elaborate meals had been prepared. Beyond it lay their most significant obstacle, a long corridor leading to the service entrance Victoria had mentioned, visibly monitored by cameras and motion sensors. "I can loop the cameras temporarily," Marcus whispered, "but the motion sensors report to a separate system I can't access from here." DeAndre studied the ceiling carefully before pointing to a maintenance hatch. Air circulation system. Should bypass the entire corridor. Using kitchen counters as improvised climbing platforms, they accessed the hatch and pulled themselves into the mansion's extensive ventilation system. The tight metal tunnels were uncomfortable but navigable, DeAndre, leading with confident directions based on the architectural patterns he had observed throughout the day. Their careful progress through the air ducts led them to a maintenance room adjacent to the service entrance, where they dropped down quietly, now just one door away from potential freedom. But as they approached this final barrier, a security monitor revealed multiple guards still stationed outside despite the distractions. Change of plan, Jamal decided quickly. "We need leverage, something more valuable than catching us." His eyes darted around the maintenance room until settling on a door marked Private, Executive Access Only. Using DeAndre's makeshift lockpicking tools again, they gained entry to what proved to be an extensive records room containing physical and digital archives of Blackwood Innovation's most sensitive operations. This is where corporations keep materials too sensitive for networked systems, Marcus realized quickly, locating a terminal that provided access to the local database. While he worked to bypass its security, Jamal and DeAndre searched through physical files, discovering folders labeled by geographic location, each containing detailed documentation of communities that had been targeted, acquired, and redeveloped by Blackwood's operations. The parallels were disturbing: predominantly minority neighborhoods, strategic deployment of code violations to pressure homeowners, coordination with local officials to rezone areas, and environmental testing reports showing valuable resources beneath seemingly worthless properties. Most disturbingly, they found multiple references to community ambassadors, local residents who had been offered individual benefits in exchange for helping facilitate their neighbors' displacement. "This is happening everywhere," Jamal murmured, examining files from communities across multiple states. "It's systematic." Marcus called them over to his terminal, where he had accessed encrypted files revealing the full scope of Blackwood's plans for Pinewood Heights. "It's worse than we thought. The mineral deposits are only part of it. They're planning to use our neighborhood as a testing ground for experimental extraction technology that's been rejected by environmental regulators in wealthier areas." The technical specifications displayed on screen confirmed DeAndre's worst fears. These processes, they'd contaminate groundwater for miles. Everyone who couldn't afford to move would be exposed to toxins for years. Working quickly, Marcus connected the data drive Victoria had provided, comparing its contents with what they were discovering. Her information is real but incomplete. She either doesn't know everything, or was only giving us part of the picture. Using skills developed through years of working with salvage technology, he began downloading critical evidence to both Victoria's drive and a second storage location he created from components in the terminal itself. Their focused work was suddenly interrupted by a voice from the doorway. "I'm genuinely impressed." Richard Blackwood stood watching them, flanked by his head of security and several guards. Unlike earlier, he now appeared almost respectful despite the circumstances. "Most adults wouldn't have made it this far through my security systems." 3 teenagers from an underfunded school managed what corporate espionage teams have failed to accomplish. He stepped forward, studying the evidence they had uncovered. "You understand, of course, that none of this changes anything. What you see here is simply business operating efficiently within the framework of American capitalism. Every practice documented in these files is technically legal if morally questionable by certain standards." The commander moved to confiscate the terminal and files, but Richard raised a hand to stop him. "I'm curious, what exactly was your plan?" You've gathered evidence, but to what end? The regulatory agencies that should enforce environmental protections include board members who hold stock in my company. The politicians who could intervene receive substantial campaign contributions from my foundation. The media outlets that might expose these practices are owned by conglomerates with whom I have mutual interests. His smile was genuinely amused rather than malicious. The system is designed to protect people like me from people like you. That's not corruption. It's the fundamental architecture of American power. Jamal stepped forward, maintaining the calm dignity that had become his shield. Maybe, but we still choose to fight it because the alternative is surrendering everything our community has built over generations. You see property values and mineral rights. We see homes where children grew up, churches that supported families through impossible times, businesses built from nothing by people who were given nothing. Richard's expression shifted to something resembling genuine curiosity. And that's worth more to you than personal advancement. Fascinating. He seemed about to continue when alarms suddenly blared throughout the building, different from the earlier distraction. The commander pressed his earpiece, listening to reports, before informing Richard, multiple security breaches, sir. Someone's accessing our systems externally. Marcus couldn't suppress a slight smile. His modifications to the tablet had included a timed program designed to create precisely this kind of disruption if they were captured. In the momentary confusion, Jamal made a desperate move, grabbing the evidence they had gathered and making a break for the exit. The commander reacted instantly, tackling him with professional efficiency. The impact sent Jamal sprawling, blood streaming from his split lip, the exact image from the story's opening hook now playing out in real time. DeAndre and Marcus attempted to help, but were quickly restrained by security personnel. Richard observed the scene with disappointed resignation. That was unnecessary. Violence is inefficient. He nodded to the commander. Call the local sheriff. Report 3 trespassers caught attempting to steal corporate documents. Emphasize their aggressive resistance when confronted. As security dragged the boys toward the front of the mansion where police would collect them, Richard walked alongside, speaking conversationally. For what it's worth, I respect your principles, misguided as they are. Loyalty, community, moral conviction, these are admirable qualities. Unfortunately, they're also liabilities in a world where pragmatic self-interest is the only reliable currency. Outside, a police cruiser was already approaching the long driveway, its lights painting the immaculate landscaping in alternating red and blue. The Rolls Royce that had brought them to the estate stood nearby, its elegant lines, a mockery of the distance between their world and Richard's. As they were marched toward waiting, authorities' blood still dripping from Marcus's swollen lip, the mansion's security system suddenly went dark, every light, camera, and electronic lock deactivating simultaneously. In the momentary confusion and darkness, Victoria appeared at the service entrance, gesturing urgently for them to run. The security team, temporarily disoriented and distracted by the catastrophic system failure, lost their grip just long enough for the boys to break free and sprint toward this unexpected escape route. Behind them, Richard stood silently in the doorway of his mansion, watching without intervening. As they disappeared into the darkness of his vast estate, the expression on his face unreadable in the shadows. What had begun with a simple act of kindness, helping a stranded traveler during a storm, had escalated into a desperate flight from forces that had been destroying communities like theirs for generations with complete impunity. Now, armed with evidence but pursued by both private security and local police, 3 teenagers faced overwhelming odds in their attempt to save not just themselves, but everything and everyone they loved from a power so entrenched that most had given up fighting it long ago. 3 days later, Richard Blackwood adjusted his Italian silk tie in the mirror of his private bathroom, preparing for the press conference where he would announce Blackwood Innovations' Pinewood Revitalization Initiative. His public relations team had crafted a masterful narrative combining economic opportunity, environmental sustainability, and community partnership, all designed to disguise what was essentially a modern form of colonial extraction. His security team had been unable to locate the 3 teenagers since their escape, but it hardly mattered now. Local police had filed trespassing reports. The county commissioners had already approved preliminary permits, and property acquisition was proceeding through shell companies that obscured Blackwood's involvement until options were date secured. "Sir," his assistant called through the intercom, "your security detail is ready. The press conference begins in 30 minutes." Richard gave his reflection a final approving nod before proceeding to his waiting vehicle. The venue for the announcement was symbolic. A conference center in the wealthier part of the county, close enough to Pinewood Heights to claim community engagement, but far enough to ensure actual residents would find attendance difficult. As his motorcade approached, Richard noted with satisfaction the media presence, local affiliates of major networks, business journalists, and carefully selected community representatives who had been quietly compensated for their supportive presence. What he didn't expect, however, was the crowd gathered outside the venue, hundreds of Pinewood residents holding signs with slogans like "Pinewood Not for Sale" and "Community Over Corporations." More concerning were the state police vehicles and what appeared to be federal agents controlling access to the building. His security chief approached the officers, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "Sir, they're requesting you proceed directly to the main hall. They won't explain further." Irritation flashed across Richard's face, but he maintained his composure as he entered the building. The conference room had been arranged according to his team's specifications. Blackwood Innovations banners displayed prominently presentation materials, prepared, selected media, positioned for optimal coverage. What hadn't been planned was the group waiting on stage, Jamal, DeAndre, and Marcus, standing alongside state environmental officials, representatives from the Department of Justice, and a team of attorneys from the National Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund. When Richard entered, camera flashes captured his momentary shock before his training reasserted control over his expression. Mr. Blackwood called a senior Department of Justice official. "Please join us on stage. We've been discussing some interesting documents regarding your company's acquisition and development practices." The following 2 hours unfolded like a carefully orchestrated demolition of everything Richard had built. Victoria appeared via video conference, providing authenticated testimony about years of documented abuses, discriminatory hiring, environmental regulation, circumvention, systematic displacement of minority communities, and targeted exploitation of areas rich in resources, but poor in political protection. "I began documenting these patterns 6 years ago," she explained to the assembled media, initially as self-protection, but eventually understanding it was evidence of something much larger. These 3 young men catalyzed what needed to happen by refusing to be compromised. The evidence the boys had managed to preserve and distribute before their capture proved devastating, particularly when combined with Victoria's meticulous documentation and the additional materials they had secured during their escape. Most damning were the geological surveys showing Blackwood had known about groundwater contamination risks, but proceeded with plans to use experimental extraction technologies in Pinewood while simultaneously rejecting the same methods in wealthier, whiter communities due to potential health impacts. The community's response had been equally strategic. What Richard hadn't anticipated was how quickly Pinewood Heights had mobilized once warned of the threat. Led by Solomon Turner, DeAndre's grandfather residents had formed a community preservation coalition, secured pro bono legal representation, and systematically documented every interaction with Blackwood's acquisition. Representatives, recording conversations that clearly showed different offers made to different homeowners based on perceived vulnerability and sophistication. "Divide and conquer is an old tactic," Solomon explained to reporters, his frail body belying his fierce determination. "It only works when people don't know they're being divided." Richard attempted to leverage his considerable connections to suppress the story-making calls to network executives and political figures from the privacy of a side room. For perhaps the first time in his career, these calls went unreturned or were met with apologetic explanations about recusing due to potential conflicts of interest, the universal signal that a formerly valuable ally had become a toxic liability. The most unexpected revelation came from historical records unearthed by the legal team. My grandfather owned 40 acres that became the original Blackwood manufacturing facility. Solomon Turner announced, his voice strengthened by righteous anger. Land that was seized through manipulated tax assessments in 1962 when Richard Blackwood's father needed to expand operations but didn't want to pay fair market value to a black landowner. The documentation was irrefutable. Deeds correspondence between county officials and Blackwood Sr. and court records showing the systematic legal manipulation that had stolen generational wealth from the Turner family. Similar stories emerged from other Pinewood families, revealing a multi-generational pattern of extraction and exploitation masked as progress and development. By evening, the Justice Department announced a comprehensive investigation into decades of potentially illegal business practices, including wire fraud, environmental violations, civil rights infringements, and witness tampering. Richard Blackwood left the conference center, not in triumph, but in disgrace, pursued by journalists shouting questions about potential criminal charges and shareholder lawsuits. His carefully constructed empire had begun to crack along fault lines that had always existed but had been hidden beneath layers of wealth influence and the systematic devaluation of those he had exploited. 1 year later, Pinewood Heights had transformed, not through external development, but through community-led revitalization supported by legal settlements and newly established ownership structures. The Turner Community Development Corporation, established through funds from the settlement of Solomon's historical land claim, had purchased key properties throughout the neighborhood, establishing a community land trust that ensured long-term affordability and prevented future predatory acquisition. DeAndre had converted the family garage into a technical training center teaching automotive and renewable energy technologies to neighborhood youth. The skills he had developed through necessity were now being formalized and shared, creating pathways to sustainable careers that didn't require leaving the community. Marcus, with support from a genuine educational foundation that recognized his brilliance without demanding community betrayal in exchange, had developed a neighborhood technology hub in the previously abandoned community center. Their residents of all ages gained digital literacy and technical skills, bridging the gap that had previously excluded them from the modern economy. Jamal had emerged as a community organizer and strategist, working with established civil rights organizations to document and challenge similar development patterns in other vulnerable neighborhoods nationwide. The settlement funds had also enabled critical infrastructure improvements. The school remained open with upgraded facilities. Roads were repaired, and essential services restored after decades of intentional neglect by county officials. Richard Blackwood's ultimate fate reflected the complexities of American justice. While his company faced significant financial penalties and restructuring requirements, his personal consequences were moderated by the legal protections that wealth provides. He resigned as CEO, but retained substantial assets, relocating to a European country with limited extradition agreements with the United States. His legacy, however, was permanently altered, from celebrated entrepreneur to case study in corporate exploitation. The Rolls Royce that had originally brought the boys to Blackwood Estate became an unexpected symbol of transformation. Surrendered as part of the settlement, it was converted by DeAndre into a mobile technology lab and health screening unit that traveled to underserved communities throughout the region. Its luxury interior, once a showcase of exclusion and excess, now housed equipment that provided essential services to those previously deemed unworthy of basic consideration. On a warm Georgia afternoon, the three friends sat together on Solomon Turner's porch, watching neighborhood children play in the street without fear of traffic, one of many small improvements that collectively transformed daily life. In Pinewood. "You know what I still think about?" Marcus asked, now 14, and already taking college-level computer science courses through a distance learning program. "How different everything would be if we hadn't stopped to help that day." DeAndre nodded thoughtfully. "Grandfather always said, character is what you do when nobody's watching. Turns out sometimes everybody ends up watching after all." Jamal gestured toward a moving truck parked outside a previously vacant home across the street. New neighbors, first white family to move into Pinewood in 20 years. They watched as a couple and their young daughter unloaded furniture, soon joined by existing residents, offering help and welcome meals. The community's strength extending naturally to include newcomers, regardless of race. That's the real difference between us and Blackwood, Jamal observed. He saw people as obstacles or tools. We see them as neighbors, whether they look like us or not. As the sun set over Pinewood Heights, the neighborhood that had nearly been erased pulsed with renewed life and purpose. The story of three boys who refused to betray their community had spread far beyond Georgia, inspiring similar resistance movements in vulnerable neighborhoods nationwide, and forcing corporations to reconsider development approaches that had previously operated without meaningful oversight or opposition. Their simple act of roadside kindness had inadvertently exposed the machinery of exploitation that relied on anonymity and isolation to function. By choosing community over individual advancement, they had demonstrated that the most effective resistance to systemic injustice often comes not from those with the most resources, but from those with the most conviction. What choices would you make if faced with the same situation as these three brave teenagers? Would you risk everything to stand up for your community against powerful forces? Comment below with your thoughts on what you would have done in Teenagers, their place. If this story inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might need to hear that standing together against injustice isn't just right, it can actually work. Thank you for following this incredible journey of courage, integrity, and the power of community bonds that proved stronger than even the most entrenched systems of power and privilege. This powerful story illustrates how courage, integrity, and community solidarity can triumph over systemic oppression and corporate greed. When Jamal, DeAndre, and Marcus chose their community over personal advancement, they demonstrated that true strength comes from standing together against injustice. They revealed how powerful interests often exploit racial and economic divides to achieve their goals, targeting vulnerable communities with limited resources to fight back. The boys' refusal to be used as tools against their own people exposed the predatory practices that had destroyed countless neighborhoods before theirs. Their story teaches us that even the most entrenched systems of power can be challenged when people unite with purpose and refuse to be divided. It shows how knowledge is power, whether mechanical skills, technological understanding, or community organizing, and how these combined strengths can create formidable resistance. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that individual choices matter. Each person faces moments when they must decide between personal benefit and collective good, between complicity and resistance. The path of integrity may be difficult, but it holds the potential to create lasting positive change that extends far beyond a single community or moment in time. Have you ever been faced with a difficult choice between standing up for what's right or taking the easy path that benefits only you? What would you have done in these boys' situation? Accept the life-changing opportunity that required betraying your community or risk everything to protect the people and place that made you who you are. Comment below with your thoughts. Also, have you witnessed discrimination or injustice in your own community, and what did you do about it? Like this video. If you believe in the power of community solidarity, subscribe if you want more inspiring stories about ordinary people standing against systemic racism, and share this with someone who might need a reminder that standing up for justice isn't just the right thing to do, it can actually work. Thank you for watching this journey of courage and integrity. Remember, the strongest communities aren't built on wealth or power, but on people who choose to stand together when it matters most.